So today I want to introduce you to a thought experiment. Now, a thought experiment is something that philosophers and political theorists come up with in order to test our intuitions about various kinds of situations that involve moral decision making. In particular, a good thought experiment can help us articulate our moral principles and figure out what features of various situations are morally relevant. Now, a thought experiment is like an example, but it's stripped of all the inconveniences and uncertainties of real-world scenarios. We can assume things that are probably never going to be 100% possible to assume in the real world, like perfect information, a knowledge of people's motivations, and an ability to perfectly calculate the consequences of our behavior. What thought experiments enable us to do is manipulate a situation in order to test our principles and see how exactly they play out in something akin to real-world scenarios. Now, I want to say immediately it doesn't really matter if the situation described isn't particularly realistic. It's not supposed to be. The fact that real situations are not like that doesn't matter as much as whether the situation helps us work through some of our moral principles. So, for example, the question, would sentient aliens have moral rights? And we can imagine, for instance, a scenario where aliens discover the planet Earth and they teleport onto the planet, and then the question becomes, how do we treat them politically speaking? Are they rights bearers despite the fact that they do not have human DNA? And of course, if it's the case that something like higher level reasoning or sentience is enough to give people or give creatures moral rights, then aliens of course have moral rights. But if moral rights are features of something more distinctively human than that, whatever that might be, then it's not clear that aliens have moral rights, and we may be perfectly authorized to shoot them on sight. Whether aliens exist or not is beside the point of trying to figure out what it is exactly that can give us moral rights. So for thought experiments, all that's really necessary is for you to try to put yourself in the right frame of mind in order to make morally appropriate or correct decisions. So let's start. I'm going to start with a classic case. You may have come across it before. It's called the trolley problem. Now, the trolley problem asks you to imagine yourself sitting at a railroad switch, and there's a trolley that's hurtling down out of control on a railway line, and it's about to hit 5 people who are crossing the railway line and are unaware of the trolley hurtling down towards them. You have the power to switch the trolley from one line to the other, but if you switch it, you know with 100% probability that you will kill some other innocent bystander on another branch of this track who happens to be crossing him or herself at that very time. And so you have a classic snap judgment to make, a moral decision to make. Do you switch the trolley? Do you switch the trolley to save 5 people and kill 1? Now, let me give you a minute to think about it. Most of my students, when they think about this question, usually say that they would switch the trolley. They usually reason something like the following. They think that saving 5 people is worth the life of 1. They compare the lives of 5 to the lives of 1. They ask me if there's anything special about the 1 or anything particularly bad about the 5, and if I tell them that they're all equal, they're generally willing, at about a 75% clip, to switch the trolley. Those who don't switch the trolley say something about the idea that killing is wrong, and that if you just allow the trolley to go along, well, then you're not doing anything. The trolley is just pursuing on its own course, and you haven't killed anybody, but in order to actually switch the trolley means you are yourself intervening in the causal process, and you are causing somebody to die, and killing is wrong. The others will answer something like, well, if you don't prevent a death you could prevent, then if you don't prevent 5 deaths you could prevent, then that's worse than killing somebody. But I think that there are reasonable views on both sides, just to note that most people want to switch the trolley. But then I modify the example. To include your mother or your grandmother, right? What happens if the one person who's on the other track, completely unawares, is your mother? That is to say, now the situation is save 5 people, but kill your mother. And now my students tend to change their mind fairly quickly, and they say, no, 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 I can't kill my mother. I would much rather let 5 people die than have my mother die. And of course, the issue that comes up there is one of, well, what makes your mother so special? In particular, is your mother morally special in some way? Why might she get consideration from you that others do not? And if individuals are allowed to treat some people differently than others, then what stops the government from doing that? What is it about the government? I'm sorry, should the government be allowed to treat some people differently than others, if you can? Particularly, should the government be allowed to treat citizens and non-citizens alike? Or should it be allowed to make distinctions between citizens? Most of us have the moral intuition that the government should treat citizens equally, non-citizens somewhat differently, and most of us have the intuition that individuals should be able to treat their family members and close friends differently than strangers. But if we proceed from the assumption that everybody is equal, right, that nobody is morally superior to anyone else, then it's hard to justify this sort of partiality. It's hard to justify why some people get treated differently than others. Indeed, some people think that the soul of morality is impartiality, is not treating anybody differently from other people. Okay. A classic case that's contrasted to the organ donor problem, contrasted to the trolley problem, is the organ donor situation. The organ donor situation functions as follows. Imagine you are a doctor in a hospital, and you have 5 patients currently who will die within 24 hours if they do not receive a particular organ transplant. One of them needs a heart, the other one needs a kidney, the other one needs another kidney, the other one needs a liver, and so on and so forth. But lo and behold, a man comes into the hospital and he's got the sniffles. It's a perfectly healthy young man, but in the course of doing his workup and doing his exam, you notice that he would be a perfect donor match for these 5 people who are about to die. You see an opportunity here. You see that you can kill this one man who just randomly walked in with the sniffles, and you could save these 5 patients and give them presumably many, many years of a fruitful life, who would otherwise be dying within 24 hours. Now the question I have to ask, if you were to find yourself in the situation of the doctor, do you kill the one person in order to save the 5? I'll give you a minute to think about it. Most of my students who answer this question are reticent. That is to say, they're unwilling to kill the one in order to save the 5. And yet, one must ask, what is so different about these situations? Is there anything really different about the organ donor and the trolley problem? One difference that you could articulate, but I don't think it's a very good one, is that in the case of the organ donor, you are much closer. You're not flipping a switch. You are personally killing them by, say, injecting them with some lethal injection, for instance. And that the personal nature of the killing makes it problematic. But of course, pulling a trigger and shooting someone seems also fairly impersonal, and we don't want to say that it's okay to shoot people, but it's not okay to stab them, say, because one of them's up close and personal. So that doesn't seem to be like a relevant distinction, one that should make us want to change our moral opinion about a situation. Others, perhaps slightly more sophisticated, would say something to the following effect. It looks like the organ donor, the person with the sniffles who walks into the hospital, is a necessary part of the plan of saving the 5 people. You are simply using the man for his organs, right? And that seems objectionable, particularly to those people who have deontology as the focus of their morality. Using people for the sake of others is a failure to treat their separateness as persons special. Everybody's got a life to live, and your life is very important to you, and nobody would want to be sacrificed against their will, even if it's in order to save 5 other people. So That situation is relevantly different than the guy crossing the train tracks with the trolley hurtling along. There, it's a matter of pure accident that that guy gets sacrificed. Flipping the switch doesn't really kill the guy by itself. If the guy wasn't on the track, the other 5 people would still survive. They would be saved. Whereas in the case of the organ donor, if the 5 people aren't saved, unless the organ donor gifts his organs. And so the situation there might be relevantly different. In one case, it's just an unhappy accident that the guy happens to be on the tracks. In the other case, the organ donor is part and parcel of the plan and necessary to the plan of saving the 5. This is called the doctrine of double effect. It says that it's okay to harm people as an unintentional but unavoidable side effect of saving or of doing something correct, of saving people in this case. Some people are not so persuaded by the doctrine of double effect, about explaining why the two situations are different. Consequentialists in particular point out that the situation isn't always relevantly the same, except that in the case of the organ donor, we have to worry that there might be more effects than just saving 5 people to killing a guy who comes into a hospital in search of a cure for the sniffles. We might worry that if such a situation were to happen quite often, that people would stop going to the hospital, would not get their diseases diagnosed early enough, and you might see a lot more unnecessary deaths as people start mistrusting the medical system. Right? So you might imagine that in the case of the trolley, maybe there's not so many external effects. In the case of the organ donor, you have to worry that there might be a lot more effects than just saving 5 people if we systematically harvested the organs of otherwise perfectly innocent and healthy people who put themselves in the care of the medical system. We would like people to trust doctors. We would like people to trust hospitals. And if they can't, then the entire system of public health arguably becomes jeopardized by this sort of practice. And so we don't want to say that it's okay to harvest organs, but we might be willing to say that it's okay to flip a switch in an emergency situation where it's 5 people or 1. So I use these hypotheticals of the organ donor and of the trolley problem in order to introduce the 3 major families of moral reasoning. These families are consequentialism, deontology, and virtue ethics. And I'm going to go through each one piece by piece. You see these featured in the La Follette article, and I encourage you to refer to that article on D2L if you want to get a fuller picture of what I'm talking about here. But the basic idea is as follows. Consequentialism says that the rightness of an act can be determined only by its consequences. So when we look at the differences, the morally relevant differences between the organ donor and the trolley problem, what we're looking at is the consequences, and in particular the different consequences. It looks like we're in both cases killing 1 to save 5, but in the organ donor case we are more worried that having a principle that says that it's okay to kill people who are otherwise healthy in order to save 5 people in a hospital potentially has wide-ranging effects on the medical system, and we're worried that the consequences are not equal, in other words. If the consequences were equal, on the other hand, for instance, if the doctor could be assured that no one would ever find out that he'd done what he'd done, then perhaps the consequentialist would be forced to say that it's okay. Deontologists, that is to say those people who understand morality as being mostly about intentions or the structural features of an act, that is to say the features of an act independent of its consequences, deontologists tend to endorse the doctrine of double effect. They tend in particular to analyze the structural features of the situation, for instance by asking whether you are using a person merely in order to save 5 other people, or whether your acts are merely the unfortunate and unintended byproducts of a virtuous act. So deontologists, again, deontology is simply the study of duty in Greek, deon, duty, or deontos, duty, logi, obviously the study of. So we're going to turn to the third major branch of moral reasoning, you might say, and this branch of moral reasoning doesn't really look like the other two. Deontology and consequentialism looks at the situation and tries to figure out what rules we should apply in order to distinguish the cases. Virtue ethics resists the idea that we should be giving determinate answers to these situations. Too much about the situations depend on particular facts, and in fact, virtue ethicists might deny the relevance of these highly artificial hypotheticals because those highly artificial hypotheticals are precisely set up in order to figure out rules of conduct or determine principles that we can apply or use to evaluate the situation. Virtue ethicists have a very different take. They think, look, most moral decision making is highly contextual. It depends on facts of time and place that that resist easy categorization by rules, and so virtue ethicists focus not on guidelines for moral action, but focus on the development of individual character. In particular, they focus on the development of virtue. So what they want to do is try and develop the practice of virtue, develop the character of individuals, such that those people are capable and able to exercise good judgment in individual situations. So the focus is, let's make good people, and good people will tend to make good decisions in situations calling for moral wisdom. And so the practice of morality for virtue ethicists is having the character that enables people to balance different virtues. So for instance, virtues like giving people their due, but also giving them what they need and what's good for them, being temperate, that is to say, exercising caution in one's moral judgment rather than being rash, wisdom, which sort of brings all of these things together in a kind of balance. The point here is there are no real hard and fast rules. All there are moral agents, and by the time you get to the situation, rules are just not going to be all that helpful given the complexity of everyday moral reasoning. So that's my quick overview of the three major families of moral reasoning through the lens of the trolley problem and the organ donor.